you just look at me? How dare you? My name is Matthew Kroll.
And as it turns out, I am capable of much unpleasantness. That must come as no surprise to anyone. My name is Shahir Dowd.
And this is the only podcast about movies, specifically the film The Favorite, with a U.
Oh,
that is important because there are two films in 2018 called The Favorite. Another one looks to be a boxing film without a U. So this is the spelling of this is Favorite, where there's no U in the other one. What the other one?
The correct way to spell it. By
yes.
The way.
Apparently, it's a boxing film directed by Curtis Graham. I had not heard the true events of Luke Benjamin Bernard, his spiritual and physical transformation, told through the life of two brothers. We're not talking about that.
No, we're talking about, I think, a podcast favorite director of ours, Yorgos Lanthimos, who we previously talked about in The Lobster. And I happened to, it was a film I missed last year and I didn't check out until events prevented me from going to see The Favorite, and we can talk about what that was in a second because I feel like it ties into everything that we've been doing in the podcast. But basically, I was heading to the movies a couple of nights ago, and we stopped because a natural event occurred. Not a natural event, an event occurred. A happening, per se.
Primordial forces were at play.
Yeah,
it was with man's meddling that it actually occurred.
So much so that I even had to call you for
That's right.
It's
good to know if you think the world is ending, you give me a call first.
Well, you lived close by, so. But for those who don't know, there was a transformer explosion, and not the Michael Bay kind. Or
there
Hasbro
goes
kind.
my Bumblebee joke.
In Astoria, Queens, which is where both of us live, and it emitted an unearthly blue light into the sky.
It looked like something out of the Avengers or any alien invasion film. It was an overcast evening.
Yeah.
So therefore, the light, when it hit, this is how it, I'm going to paint the picture. You were walking down the street when this happened, right?
Yeah, I was actually heading to The Favorite.
Great. Myself, my girlfriend Jamie, and her roommate Elise of Speaking of Carrie Fame, our sister podcast, we were watching them for the first time. We were watching Ex Machina.
Oh, wow.
And I shit you not, Shahir, the second time that she puts her hand on the inductor plate and knocks the power out, the power flickered in our house and then came back, but then the hum and the blue light, it was like it was daytime out at 9 o'clock at night.
That was the creepy thing.
And we were close enough where we heard the hum of it.
Right.
And so everyone's freaking out. And I didn't freak out too much because the power came back. I think if the power had gone out and that happened, I'd be like, oh, EMP, we're dead.
Yeah. I have to admit, nuclear strike kind of like hovered in the back of my head for an instant.
So this is where we're at as a society and media. I went towards aliens first. In my subconscious, I was like, oh, fuck. Because, and again, I would have gone nuclear strike if the electricity had gone out, because the EMP wave would have hit us before the blast wave, and we'd be all dead very, very quickly in Queens.
I love how you can rationalize nuclear blast, but also believe that an alien.
Well, because because I'm a little bit obsessive compulsive about all the different ways New York City can kill us.
Yeah.
If that was a nuclear blast, we would be dead so quickly, and the grid would be knocked off instantly. Where the grid was still going, so I was like, okay, what the hell else can make this hum? I was like, or interdimensional portal. And the thing about it is, it's because I'm inundated with my media so much, and I've done a little bit of research where, like, even though I'm like, this is ridiculous, I was like, but what if it's not?
I think Kevin Feige and the Marvel movies have trained us well to anticipate an alien invasion.
Yeah, if you see a bright blue light emanating.
That's the thing. It wasn't just like a white light. It was sort of neon blue, and it lit up the entire sky.
It was daytime with a blue tint for 5 minutes, and then when you watched it go out, you're like, because we were outside. I have video. Go to my Twitter, Emperor MSK, if you want to take a look at this weird ass. Like, you see the contrast, because I've seen a lot of videos of it, but not it ending.
Yeah.
And you see it, and we're outside, and we're kind of freaking out, and then it just goes away, and you're like, So is Thanos done?
So with us, we were, as I say, we were walking down the street towards the movies, and then it happened. And what happened was everyone started coming out of their houses.
Yep,
we were
same.
walking down a residential street, and everyone started talking to each other and like going, "What is this? Are you seeing this?" And it was kind of like a communal event, I have to admit. Like it brought us all together.
Everything always brings you together until the resources get scarce.
Yeah, I know that is exactly what I was thinking. And then like Shivali and like, because we'd left our child at home with my mother, and so we were like, you know what, we're gonna go home now and pack our go bags.
Yeah.
But the upshot of all of this was that it gave me an opportunity to watch Killing of a Sacred Deer, which was dope. So there you go.
Well, we finished Ex Machina, but always looked at the overloading of the power plant in that particular film much, much different.
Yeah, there you go.
So that was our weird little experience in Queens. Hopefully you enjoyed that tangential thing. It was definitely, it was one of my favorite times in the city.
Oh, there you go. Favorite with you. I want to shout out a couple of things here. First off, this is an unusual one, but and this is entirely, as you quoted it earlier, entirely masturbatory, but we're going to do it.
Oh.
Which is that listener, friend of the show, Jonathan Blade, has a wonderful podcast called My Handle is Jonathan Blade, which is a good title. Just kind of like the only podcast about movies. Very just direct and to the point.
And if you are a Blade, like Jonathan is,
there you go.
You need a handle.
Yeah, and he did a review session of his favorite podcast of the year, and we were very thrilled to be mentioned in that review podcast as his favorite.
Well, no, not his favorite. He was one of. It wasn't.
He says on the pod, roll the tape. He says my favorite of the podcast.
Are we really gonna do this sort of masturbatory exercise?
I'm unzipping. Let's
Okay.
do this.
Okay, here we go.
But my favorite of my Filmcast collection is the only podcast about movies. So their shtick is that they are two film industry professionals discussing movies from an aesthete versus the everyman perspective. The energy is great, but the draw is that Shahir and Matt can throw friendly but passionate words over resolute opinions, and it's captivating. But if you enjoy a thing, it's really the two sides of yourself at odds with each other. Can I enjoy this thing because the craft of it is exhilarating to me, or does it need to be layered enough that it invites deconstruction and therefore becomes fractally more intriguing with each analysis? For film, I'm the everyman, but I enjoy the challenge presented in the deconstruction. I enjoy this cast.
Sorry, I'm just coming down from that.
Oh, Jonathan.
Thanks, buddy. We
Thanks,
appreciate
man.
that. And we want to do a big special shout out to his podcast, because that actual review episode turned me on to a lot of podcasts that I hadn't heard before, a lot of tech podcasts. And I'm not really super into tech podcasts, but he mentioned a few there that I've listened to now, and I really enjoyed it. I also really like Jonathan Blade's voice. So
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I didn't know he sounded as buttery as he did.
I know, it's silky smooth. Right?
Also, thank you for calling us professionals. That's always a pleasant surprise. And also, and lastly, Jonathan, thank you so much for using one of my favorite words, fractally.
There you go. Yes.
So that was really nice. Thank you, Jonathan.
Appreciate that. So, and moving on, we have a couple of other things that I want to call out. First off, an email from Jamesa, which I cannot read to you.
What?
Because Jamesa, who's done this before and has actually prompted us to review a movie, and that was the case of The Predator. She sent us an email just reviewing, what was it? If Beale Street Could Talk and Bird Box. I can't look at these emails.
No.
Which
is ironic because of Bird Box.
Yeah, the character in Bird Box. You can't look.
People are like, oh, it's an origin story to Daredevil. And from what I've heard, no, it's not. It's an origin story from Kenshi from Mortal Kombat.
I've also heard it's a remake of The Happening.
Okay.
Which is probably spoiling it too much, because I do want to see that film. Again, Jamesa, thank you for the email. We will get to those films. We're definitely doing If Beale Street Could Talk. So hopefully we'll do Bird Box as well if we can get it in.
We're getting a lot of things from our favorite people for the favorite episode with a U. Another one of our favorite people who just released their top movie lists of the year is one President Barack Obama.
Not my president. No, I'm just kidding.
What? Well, technically, you're correct.
Yeah, he's not my president right now, which is making me really sad.
Hashtag not my current president.
Yeah.
So he just released a bunch of films that he really enjoyed, and you can check those out. I'm sure you could Google it, but I'll just read some right now. Annihilation, Black Panther, Black Klansman, Blind Spotting, Burning, The Death of Stalin, Eighth Grade, If Beale Street Could Talk, Leave No Trace, Minding the Gap, The Rider, Roma, Shoplifter, lifters, support the girls, and won't you be my neighbor?
So the thing that makes me sad about this list, and he released this with his list of favorite songs and favorite books of the year as well. And what makes me sad about that is he's reading a lot. He seems to be a very busy man, but he has time to read way more books than I do. What I like about this list is it prompts me to a few films that we haven't seen this year that I want to see. I really want to see The Rider. Hopefully, maybe we can get that in before.
I want to see Minding the Gap. I want to see Support the Girls.
Yeah, and Burning is the other one.
Yeah. And I forgot that Death of Stalin was this year.
Yeah, Death of Stalin was this year. I've been thinking about my top 10 list this year, and I've been going back over our 2018 picks, and Death of Stalin was like, ooh, I like you.
Well, we should. Are we going to do a best of again?
What do you mean?
Okay.
And what do you mean? We like the thing we've done every year to wrap out every year of the podcast.
Is that going to be next week?
No, I remember last year we your podcast memory is starting to trouble me. We extended it out because we wanted to make sure we got in some 2018 films that we'd missed, and we pushed it out into 2019 just to make sure that we had fully reviewed the films that would appear on the list, because as our list can only include the films we reviewed, not the films we've seen.
Wait, you're saying we're doing a podcast?
Yeah, I mean, you've put up pictures on the wall.
Is this real life?
It is, and here's where you can find the Sid podcast at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com. Notice I'm slowing myself down so I don't
Only Movie Pod on Twitter if you'd like to do that.
Yeah, there you go.
Also, iTunes reviews. Sorry, we're just getting all this stuff out of the way. We've been getting some nice ones. Then iTunes took away a lot of our reviews, and then Shahir had to kick down the Apple door and be like, hey, you put those back, and they're like, I'm so sorry it happened to everyone. And you're like, no, you're focusing on us, and they're like, no, we're not. But they put them all back. So all of your lovely reviews are back, thanks to Shahir laying down the internet law.
And as it is going to be the new year this year, I just I wanted to shout out one little thing that is happening, which is that our fellow podcaster Stephen Buja is ending.
Yeah, I love when things ending
the Oscar Watch podcast, which is a fantastic podcast which looks back at Oscar winners over the years. You've been on the podcast a couple of times. Yep. I've been on the podcast a couple of times. And Stephen Buja's been on our podcast as well.
And I started my whole movie reviewing spiel back at Same Night Movie Review with one Stephen Buja. So
this is not the end of Stephen Buja.
No.
He is gonna. We are assured. I'm certain that he will be back in podcast form in some way discussing movies
like the mighty podcast Phoenix
that he is. And but he is drawing Oscar Watch podcast to an end, which is unfortunate. And we just want to shout out that podcast because there are 4 more episodes coming up, but there's an entire back catalog of Best Picture, Best Foreign Film winners, Best Actor winners, Best Screenplay winners, all available for you to listen to and to digest and discuss. So very sad to hear that go, but
if you're hopping dimensions and you want to find another movie
podcast,
yes,
I forgot about that.
Then that is the one you should check out.
Okay. Now, moving on to the favorite, finally getting there.
Yeah.
Again, Yorgos Lanthimos. The last time we talked about Yorgos Lanthimos, we talked about The Lobster, which I think had one of our most, as Jonathan Blade would put it, passionate discussions.
Yes, politely.
Passionate discussion. Please go back and listen to that episode because it's a trip. It's a road trip. So this was going to be an interesting one, but you were excited to see this film.
Yes. I like anything that looks I will use the term for like the trailers and the advertising, effortlessly different.
Okay.
And this didn't look like they were like trying to be different for different sake. It just looked like it felt like slightly different than something I'd seen lately.
Okay.
And I really, really dug that. It's kind of taking the historical, what is it? Great Britain, Ireland, and Scotland sort of the
Tudor period.
Yeah.
The antiquities.
I believe it takes place in
1707.
Yeah. And sort of.
What about the trailer made you say this is going to be different?
Well, okay, so you're taking a time period where there's a lot of silly frivolousness for the aristocracy, but it's often not actually played for comedy in a weird way. But also, it looked like it balanced comedy, the ridiculousness of it all, and an actual real darkness of weight to it.
Okay.
And that's something that I liked that about The Lobster, too. That it took something that was so silly of a concept of like, oh yeah, you become the animal, like whatever, and then like just played it totally straight and like continued down the road that it was doing, even if I didn't, love the ending. This one, and also this has a lot of my sort of some favorites of mine in the actual film. Obviously, Rachel Weisz, Emma Stone, and Nicholas Hoult, one of my favorites, who showed up in this, and actually I thought was very, very kind of awesome in his own right. And of course, Olivia Colman playing Queen Anne. I just thought the performances, even in the trailer, it's funny because there was a lot of acting going on behind words, if that makes sense. And you could sometimes that's a slow burn and you need to actually see the film to sort of like really understand that. But I was like, oh, there's going to be a lot of like layers upon layers of what these characters are thinking behind what they're saying, behind what they're doing. And
is that something you don't normally see in a trailer?
I would argue yes.
Okay.
That a lot of times, this is just pure opinion, but a lot of times trailers are built to either entice or intrigue or wow, right? Or those sort of things. And very rare, I think an intriguing trailer based on sort of dialogue and the way that dialogue is handled is probably one of the hardest to do. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of trailers try, especially for like mysteries or like murders or like, things like that. And sometimes it works. Oftentimes it doesn't. Then I'm just like, okay, well, we'll see. And oftentimes the movies are better than the trailers. I thought this trailer particularly pulled me in. So
it was the trailer that got you in. It wasn't the thought there was Yorgos Lanthimos.
I didn't know it was him until I saw the trailer.
Okay.
And then I was like, oh, so that was like the final, like, haha, I'm definitely going to go see this.
Okay.
Also, for whatever reason, and this is a weird statement. Mm-hmm. The font and the text treatment in this film.
It's nice, right?
It is nice, but it's the kind that I normally hate.
Okay.
It's basically the spacing of like small worded letters. So like the word "the" is just as spaced out as the word "favorite," and that's throughout the entire thing. And it's in the trailer and like whatever. And normally I'm just like, when I see that kind of style, it's something that never. It always leaves a bad taste in my mouth. But by the time I was done with the trailer, I was so enamored. I was like, oh, this makes sense. Cool. Like, and if a trailer or a film can take an aesthetic that I inherently, for probably no reason, dislike and make me be cool with it, or even like, yep, this is used correctly, then I know it's doing something well under the hood.
Okay. How would you, what about the way it's used in this particular trailer or even the actual film itself worked for you?
I mean, particularly the way that, okay, so the trailer basically, this is, incredibly minor spoilers for the trailer at this point, but it's basically two women vying for the ear or the friendship or the whatever of the queen.
Yeah.
Who herself has a bunch of different, physical ailments along with some mental ailments. And so they're kind of like, as I'm sure aristocracy did back in the day and probably still does today, taking advantage of people's needs, gullibilities, problems, etc., to sort of like be the worm tongue, if you will, and actually be the power behind the power. Mm-hmm. I think having this seem like a small story about two people vying for the sort of to be the quote favorite, that sort of like eventually spreads them apart from one another because they're cousins in the film. Mm-hmm. The spacing of the text seemed to make sense because the entirety of this story is just basically, as the movie goes on, the distances between folks seems to be very apparent.
Yeah.
And so it all tied in thematically. It's funny because when I watched the trailer, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But I felt it a little bit, and then like I think the feeling that the trailer was giving, both through the very deliberate and great choices in very small moments that we were given in the trailer, plus the editing of the trailer, I thought was very good. It's basically knowing your tone, being it graphically or pacing or acting, and like matching it perfectly throughout the thing you're creating. And I'm specifically talking about the trailer. In the film, I have one or two issues about it as a full film, but in trailer form, I was like, this is like a cohesive piece of something that they know what they are doing. And then when The Lobster hit, as again, with my problems with the end of The Lobster, I loved it until the end. And when I thought the end of The Lobster, we don't have to get into this, but just as a refresher for people, I thought it was a bit of a kind of a cop-out or just sort of a non-ending, which we've talked about before. I was like, the feeling that this trailer gave me made me feel like that would not be the case. That feeling would not creep in on me.
Okay.
And then so you add that to me really liking The Lobster otherwise, then I got excited.
Okay.
So that's basically where I was at. What about you? You don't watch trailers, obviously.
I didn't watch the trailer of this. Yorgos Lanthimos is someone I think is a really interesting voice in film.
Yeah.
Someone who I want to see more films of. And then so and I think films about antiquities, about the Tudor period, are a bit of a hard sell for me.
Yeah.
It's like they tend to feel like they might be stuffy period dramas. So I was I was a little bit hesitant, but I heard, again, I just like glanced at the top 10 list of the year from many people, and it was on there many, many times. And I was like, okay, yeah, cool, I'm going to see that, because I also like that filmmaker. I think the thing that I was intrigued by with this film. And let's, you've kind of given a synopsis already, but let's just talk about how we responded to the film. And I think the thing that I will just say flat out, I love the film, pretty unabashedly as well. And the night before, I watched Killing of a Sacred Deer, which is his previous film, which I love. Now, I think that film is really challenging and difficult and hard. It's not for everyone. It just as much as I think The Lobster is not for everyone, just as much as I think Dogtooth is not for everyone. But this is probably Yorgos Lanthimos' most accessible film. It is, but it still contains the things that I think he, as a filmmaker, is interested in, which is the thing that he seems to be obsessed by, or that follows his work, is hermetically sealed communities that have their own forms of language, their own ways of orientating themselves, that are entirely unique and oftentimes go against the grain of like what we expect in common society.
Yeah.
And I think that's a strong thread through everything he's done, and it's a strong thread through this film. Yet this film is the most accessible because it is touching on a historical period that we all kind of know. Like in the case of The Lobster, it's a fantastical dystopia. In the case of Killing of a Sacred Deer, it's sort of a David Lynchian version of suburbia. Dogtooth is almost the same thing. Those are worlds that we don't really often get access to.
Yeah.
But this is a world that we've seen a lot in film. And I think one of the things I wanted to think about in this film was that on this podcast, we have done a number of historical film. And I'm thinking back to First Man, The Death of Stalin, even this year, I, Tonya, The Post, Detroit, Dunkirk, Barry, Deepwater Horizon, Spotlight. That's another fun conversation to listen to. But one of the things that we've come up against in terms of historical films is, where does the line between our understanding of how history played out versus the interpretation of historical fact in these movies, where does that line get drawn in terms of our appreciation of the film? Like in the case of say Detroit, for example, we asked the question, I think, thinking back about Detroit, is like, whose story is this film?
Right.
Like, where does who gets to tell this story, and how do they get to interpret it and tell it? Because that was a film that focused very heavily on a villain. I guess you would argue a villain character,
right? Whereas
another filmmaker may have made it about the victims of that event. But then a film like The Death of Stalin, for example, completely subverts our expectation of historical understanding by taking a look at Russian history, but does it from English actors speaking English in an entirely absurdist comedic way.
Yeah.
And so the thing that I was thinking about with this film is the way in which it plays with history. And I think the most successful thing about this film that actually just unlocked me to enjoy it without ever having to consider that question was the fact that it doesn't have based on a true story. Even though a lot of this is based in historical fact, but they never go out of their way to state that. And the film kind of openly, I think because of that, and because of the level of absurdity it gets into, never has to get you to think about, like, oh, is this actually how it played out?
Yeah, because I went back and I researched it a little bit, and I was like, oh, like the Queen Anne was there, had the same sort of problems that this Queen Anne has. There was also the two women were actual people in the Queen's life.
Yeah.
Now the relationship is debated depending on what you know, that they go back and forth, as you know, things that are sort of kept under a rug in history tend to be. I've learned a lot of that basically working on Extra History with Robert Rath, who is very excited, a writer on Extra History, who wanted to be on this episode but could not see it in time.
Yeah. I would have been very curious about his interpretation of the way this plays with history.
Maybe I can get him to just write us an email once he sees it, because he's a phenomenal historian, and I was curious what his thoughts would be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did a little bit of a deep dive because I didn't know this particular part of the history of Great Britain. And it's interesting that they didn't choose to do that sort of based on a true story, because I think that's an apt thing by the director or the marketing team, at least, because they knew that that's not the point.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to know your film's point.
Good. You're stating a lot of things that seem to be obvious, like make a good trailer and know your film's point.
Well, okay, but honestly, those are simple things. A lot of films don't do that,
right?
And look, maybe we're at a time where that's sort of important. Like, baking, you want to make sure you actually have good ingredients and you're not just putting in garbage. Like, you need to know the basics before you can continue on to go towards excellence.
So I dug up a couple of interesting things, thinking about this question. Now, I want to specifically talk about the detail of the film after we get through this kind of historical hump first. But the reason why I think this is an interesting question is that, and I found this article that was in Variety a little while back, which referred to a study from Jeffrey Sachs, a psychology professor from Washington U, who probed the phenomenon of people believing films more than historical fact.
Yeah.
So the contention there was that I think it was I can't find this. The students would accept a movie version of history 30% of the time, while knowing the historical fact. So if what the study did was give students basically a study, information on a historical period,
sure,
and then show them the film version of that, which was historically inaccurate or contradicted the information that they had been previously given as fact. And in 30% of the cases, most students who knew the history would actually believe the film version over. And what the assumption, the extrapolation that they made is for people who don't have historical information at their fingertips would more than likely believe the film's versions of history over historical fact most of the time.
Are you saying that he proved that human beings can be subject to propaganda?
Well, I think the exact phrase that he used was, our minds are not well equipped to sort good sources from bad ones.
They are not.
And so, and I think that's an interesting framework to go into this film. Now, the thing that I think I've tried to make a point about, or I think we've talked about on this podcast, is that I don't care if a film is historically inaccurate. I want a film to to have a clear line about what it wants to say. But the problem that occurs is when films purport to be historically absolute and then deviate from that. So for example, the film Argo, the Ben Affleck film that won Best Picture many years ago, ends, very sort of confidently with images of the real people versus the actors that they had played in the film, in a way to kind of like illustrate how, even though this was an absurd story, it really did happen.
Yeah. The
fact of the matter is, a lot of what happened in Argo is made up, and made up in a way which contradicts what that film is trying to say. And I think that, for me, is where the issue lies. Is, again, I don't really mind if you are historically inaccurate. What I mind is when you are trying to make a point and your point gets undermined by being historically inaccurate.
I think the phrase based on a true story or based on actual events is a weird sort of advertising stopgap where technically it's not lying.
Yeah.
Because you use the word based on.
Yeah.
But to be honest, you could throw that in the same context that marketing companies throw that line or those lines onto advertisements for films, you could throw that onto any film.
Yeah.
And it would have the same amount of, not to quote Stephen Colbert, but truthiness that it does in these other films. So I totally agree with you when a film is touting itself or making a large point that it like the reason why the things it's showing you is important is because it's historically accurate and it really happened.
Yeah.
And it's not. That's a problem.
Yeah, and so I was reading quotes from interviews with Yorgos Lanthimos, and one of the things he said, like right out loud, is some of the things in this film are accurate and a lot aren't. And so he's very very much acknowledging the historical, like what he wants to do with this film is take a point in history and look at it from the storytelling point of view that he wants to tell. And I think that is to me is the purest form the purest thing you can do as a filmmaker. It got me thinking about a couple of things historically. There's obviously revisionist history films like Inglourious Basterds, which like completely, has fun with the idea of history. Oddly, the death of Stalin is very historically accurate while looking and feeling like it's not.
Yeah.
That's kind of a crazy thing as well. And then I was having a conversation with a friend about Peter Jackson this week, and we got into like a lot of the films that he tried to make and didn't get made. And one of them was a movie by the name of Dam Busters, which is a remake of a World War II film about the great British dam busters who used this sort of special bomb to break down a German barrier or something like that.
Okay.
And the issue that film had, this is a really curious case where they, the earlier film was very popular. Peter Jackson loved that film and wanted to do a remake of it. He'd hired Stephen Fry, the writer, to write it, who was historically very well versed. He came to New Zealand to write that film.
Sure.
And the interesting thing that happened is that there's a central character in that film and in the real world, who had a pet dog. And the dog's name was a derogatory term for African-American people starting with the letter N.
Okay.
And that phrase was used as one of the operation bombing points. And that is historical fact.
Yeah.
But what Peter Jackson discovered, or, basically learned as people were kind of figuring this out, was that you can't make that film in 2015 or 2010 when he wanted to make it. Basically having the hero of your film... Or you're in a sort of you're in a quandary about that, because basically you're going to release a mainstream big blockbuster film where the main character walks around calling his dog the N-word, a white man calling his dog the N-word, but that is historically accurate. So you're in a sort of a weird quandary, and I think what that points to is that historical interpretations are a reflection of the time that they are made in.
Sure, but also just change the dog name.
But that would be historically inaccurate.
Who gives a shit?
Well, I think people who are interested in history would, because that was the name.
Sure, then make a documentary. I'm saying if you look, no narrative film, no matter how based on true events, is going to be as accurate as what actually happened in the real world.
Right.
Therefore, if you want to tell that story, change the dog's name. And then when you do your interviews and you do all that shit, you can do, honestly, what we do on Extra History and do a Lies episode and just be like, look, yeah, we changed this because we don't want to do this, but the story itself is super interesting. And again, I don't know the particulars of that moment in history, but as long as the actual name of it doesn't have a pure, like, changing the narrative of the thing itself, which it doesn't sound like, even if it's a code name for a bombing operation in the name of a dog, you could change that to be Mordor. And then who gives a shit? Like that's when historical accuracy gets to that point and you're like, well, can't do it. It's like, well, then maybe you should be making a documentary and not actually.
Well, this year Peter Jackson did make a documentary about World War I.
Right.
This They Will Not Grow Old.
Yeah.
I will say, I think the thing is that they ran into something that they just hadn't considered, which was that basically.
How do you not consider that?
Well, I mean. Well, if you're the answer is if you don't have people of color in the room when you're writing that film,
forest through the trees, and
that's what might happen. So I think that's an interesting thing. But that's all to say. Coming back to The Favorite, is that I think the way to think about it is historical interpretations are a reflection of the time that they are released in. So this film, which is not historically accurate, but doesn't make a point about it, omits a lot of details, but this film kind of feels entirely 2018. It's a film about women in power vying for the power, vying for people around them, and men are insignificant in that power vacuum.
It feels you are correct, but also I think it's important that we remember that it feels 2018 because of where we're living right now, but it also feels very 1700s because that was also the time then.
And that's the point, is that when we look back in history, we're
picking stories that mimic our feelings currently.
That matter for our context, which is why I think the Dam Buster story is interesting, because that the context didn't match where we are today. And I think that would have been a difficult thing for that film.
No, so I'm gonna have to disagree with you on that, because the context of say The Favorite, women in power, let's just use that as that's what we're calling the context. Makes 100% sense that the two time periods sort of match up in that particular way. The Dam Busters thing is literally nomenclature that is now offensive. It has nothing to do with the actual story that they're trying to tell.
I'm maybe not characterizing it as important, but that name is very significant to the story.
I guess I can't in my head currently figure out a way narratively where that is true. If it is, then that's a different story that I can't even speak to right now because I'm not familiar enough with it.
I will say, because I asked the same question. Why can't they just change the name? The dog is significant to the story. The dog and that name is significant to that story.
But for instance, unless it literally has to do with racism itself, unless the name about the operation and the dog have to do with actual racism or derogatory terminology, etc., they could change it as long as they changed it consistently, and it would still have the same narrative punch. And I'm trying to figure out a way.
Would you be then concealing the inherent racism of the characters?
Because you literally talk about it. You literally talk about it on the press tour, and you could be like, "Look, this is."
But it's not in the film. If it's not in the film, then you're omitting it from the film.
You could say it in the beginning. You could say like, specific names were changed due to the fact that with this, while we tried to be historically accurate here, there, and the other thing.
Right. And then people would argue then that you're rewriting history, which I think.
But you're admitting to rewriting history, and if people want or really, really need to, like, there's again, I've said this before about films or really any media, right? Is as long as it does more good than harm.
Right. How do you quantify that?
I would say if you have to tell this story,
right,
and there's a specific thing that does not affect the actual feeling or the narrative behind the thing, you can get across that this dude's a racist without just casually dropping the N-word every other sentence when he's talking to his dog. There's ways you can do it. You can get just like the way a lot of historical films do. You can get the feeling of the time across while still changing some small details.
Right.
So that's literally what movie making is.
I don't think I quantify. I kind of gave you the estimation of how important this was.
Are you setting me up to fail?
No. You seem to have a very definitive answer to this, but this actually stopped this movie dead in its track. A Peter Jackson film coming off the height of Lord of the Rings and King Kong. And now movie stopped dead in its track because of this issue.
So do we have Mortal Engines? Do we have this film to play for Mortal Engines?
We do, because it was this was a film that Peter Jackson was going to produce and Christian Rivers was going to direct, and they'd stopped because of this issue, and Mortal Engines was the film that came out.
Wow.
So it's just something interesting to note there. And I think, the issue here for this film, although the screenplay for this film was written in 1998, it didn't get made until 2018. And a couple of interesting stories from Deborah, the writer, Deborah Davis, was that distributors were worried that there weren't enough men in this film, or distributors were worried that there weren't enough key male roles in this film. And in fact, one of the things that is really interesting is that King George, who was Queen Anne's husband, was alive during this period, but is entirely omitted from this film. And I think that is a reflection of how this film is very much of its time today. And I think it is stronger for that reason.
Sure. If King George is alive... Oh, okay, yeah, sorry. I was just sort of piecing it together. But you're right, it's because it's not about that. I mean,
it's not about that at all. It's about the triangle between these three women that gets formed in I guess... He did pass away kind of relatively soon after this, but to include him sort of adds a sort of monstrous power, not vacuum, but what's the opposite of that?
Well, but the Queen was still in command at this point.
In historical terms, I don't believe she was.
No?
Yeah, I
well,
think,
she's dealing with she was in this film anyway. And again, revisionist, and maybe I'll have to ask Rob about this. But she was making military decisions.
Yeah, in this film,
story.
and I think in real historical terms, she might not have been. She may have been halfway during this period,
right?
Because he passed away and he might have been ill during that period.
Oh, but yeah. So in this telling, he could have already been dead. They don't address it in the film, but that could be.
But he's entirely dead in this film during this period. So I think that's really interesting. Just thinking about the historical context of this film before we even go into it, just like where does this film sit? And I think that's an interesting sort of just framework to sort of consider the film.
Yeah, anyone who's listening, onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com. If you know the actual sort of, if you've done more research than we have, and you're listening to this and being like, why aren't you saying this thing about that? Like, email us in, let us know. We'd love to know more. Yeah.
Regardless of that, again, as I said up front, I absolutely love this film because I think it's this wonderful power triangle between these three, incredible performances. Rachel Weisz, Emma Stone? Emma Stone. I was going to say Emma Thomas for some reason.
Yeah,
and Olivia Colman playing the Queen. I think this is just an incredibly tight chessboard of a film where two power players are basically vying for the affections of this character. And then by the time it got to the end of the movie, I think it strived for something bigger than that in terms of talking about what the goal of power might do to people. And I think it was just really wonderful for that. And this is why this is probably his most accessible, Yorgos Lanthimos' most accessible film. It points to something really concrete that we can grasp onto. Whereas I think his other films are a little bit more abstract in in the way they form ideas.
Yeah.
So I absolutely loved this film for basically giving me an opportunity to see a tight chessboard of a game of a power play between three characters, and I was riveted the entire way through it.
And it does something interesting in its in the way the story is told and the way that it affects you as a viewer. In the beginning, and I think this is a real kudos moment because I feel like direction is where this nice thing lies. You're rooting. The movie wants you to be rooting for Emma Stone in the beginning.
Yeah.
But then a funny thing happens as you're sort of going through. You slowly, depending on your type of personality, slowly or quickly, you kind of stop rooting for her, or the film wants you to stop rooting for her.
Yeah.
In a weird way. And then you kind of seeing like, oh, well, maybe even all the negative traits we saw in one character is actually present in both.
Yeah.
And then the very end of the film, which we can get to eventually, like sort of gives the coup de grace of like, this is what we're saying.
Yeah.
And I again, very rarely do you have that moment work as well and as subtly as this, because I started rooting for the other character without realizing I was doing it, and then like I was already doing it, and I was like, wait, I didn't want the movie.
Yeah.
Like it was very apt and very
complexity of storytelling.
Of storytelling and the exact type of cinematics, I'll call it cinematic sleight of hand with the plot, where it got me feeling ways I didn't know that I thought of it. If you told me I was going to switch, it did it without me. It made me look one direction while making my feelings go another, and then it took me a second to sort of like get right. I'm like, hey, movie, you cut that out. You put my watch back. It did some great film pickpocketing of my emotions.
Right. I think the reason it does that is that it is that every action is okay. No, actually, I'll frame this another way. Unlike Dogtooth, Killing of a Sacred Deer, or even The Lobster, where characters are kind of choose to be in the worlds that they live in, that they inhabit. That might not be true for Dogtooth, by the way. But in this film, everyone feels like a victim of circumstance, or a victim of the place that they've found themselves in. And one of the most remarkable parts about that was the amount of empathy this film was able to draw from me for Queen Anne.
Yeah. Well, she's kind of a victim, weirdly.
She's also the most brutal user of her power throughout the film, but she's in but the film allows us to understand that she's in a place that I don't think she ever wanted to be in, and has experienced a lot of trauma in her life, which makes this power, this sort of power throne that she sits upon, completely lonely and isolating. So this need to have other people's affections actually really makes sense, and it's a very powerful thing. When you see her walking down the hallway screaming, "Where am I? Where am I?" It actually really, like I think, like my interest in antiquities and the royal court and all that stuff has always been, I've been less interested in the power players as much as I'm more interested in the victims of those people. But this film kind of like let me enjoy that.
And it's also shocking in a weird way too, the what one might see as similarities to 1704 or whatever, and to 2018,
right?
Having a leader, say, who might not be the most mentally stable, being manipulated by forces beyond their control. Now, granted, in this film, Queen Anne is seen as a bit of a
buffoon.
A sympathetic buffoon. There's a lot of arrested development that feels like has gone on through her life, along with her physical and mental issues that have been plaguing her for her entire existence.
I mean, just think about...
And history has thrown her. And I was just looking at how she came to be, and like so many bad things had to happen to the competent people to get her to be the one in being the queen.
Yeah.
And it's so funny, and it's kind of the reason why I think you can kind of prove that monarchies in classical historical senses don't work, because no matter how great a family is, eventually you're gonna have someone who is not suited to lead.
Right.
Leadership is not something that is just going to genetically be passed through everyone. I mean, and it could be based on mental acuity, it could be based on interest, it could be based on physical problem. Like, so
also the vacuum that power creates within a family creates a different kind of person that initially got that power.
And if you look at it from this way, there's many people in the court that probably, for instance, wanted Queen Anne to continue being queen because they felt they could manipulate her. Because if you have someone that has a lot of these maladies or these issues, you can play the game. I mean, there's totally a reason why Rachel Weisz's character of Lady Sarah, she the only reason the Queen Anne is still in power is because of Rachel Weisz's character.
Right.
She's controlled it. This is not sort of stated. Because she would have been manipulated into a different way, and this is me sort of.
I don't think they could have stopped the queen from being the queen.
No.
Right?
But for instance, the queen could have been manipulated in a different way, or killed or forced out of power or something. I feel like the Rachel Weisz's character Sarah basically was kind of like a manipulating yet guardian angel. She, even in the beginning, you're seeing how she protects and moves things away from her. There's a care there, but there's also, I'm watching out for myself. I'm saying you could have had a less benevolent manipulator do things that might have ended your reign sooner.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting line that the film kind of, or an interesting journey that the film kind of takes you on, which is that you, at the beginning, you do think that Rachel Weisz is just manipulating as a power-hungry person who, has found themselves in this like position of privilege.
Yeah.
But as you kind of follow the film along, you realize that she does protect the queen. She does actually like have an affection for this queen.
There's a point. I feel like we've gotten pretty far without doing a lot of spoilers, and I don't think we have to.
Yeah.
So there's a point.
I do want to talk about the very, very ending,
which is fine. Which you can, and I don't think that'll spoil too much, especially sort of specific twist points. I guess there's a point where Sarah threatens a thing, and then basically destroys her ability to actually go through with that threat, and you can tell it's because she actually does care about the queen.
I think she cares about, I agree. That was a point where I was like, I kind of, oftentimes I throw my hands up in movies, and like this character had this like power play, which is that she could affect change to the or harm this person, and then she like burns the letters. And I was like, oh, why would you do that? Now,
spoiler.
Yeah. We're in spoilers now.
All right, I was trying to keep it clean, but she just wants to go dirty.
Yeah, I want to go full spoilers at this point.
There's shit in the mud.
There is shit in the mud. Well, that's what people do around these parts. No, I loved that you do change your affection some way, and you see this character whom we kind of love at the beginning, Abigail, like perhaps you should play an animal, a monster for my kids or something like that. And she goes, you kind of you're endeared to her, and it's played by Emma Stone, who is an endearing performer on screen. And then slowly through the course of the film, that endearment kind of gets shifted away as we realize how how much she is capable of doing. And I think my quote from the beginning is, I'm capable of much unpleasantness, is really true. But you also understand, there's a line in the middle of the film where she says, "You can't get me now, I'm safe." And that line is really key because she is safe, and she's safe from the kinds of harms that she was trying to get away from, which are really devastating. Like she was raped, many, many times to get to this point. She was
her father lost her in a card game.
Yeah, and she's sleeping on a mattress, and she was, sleeping in a room full of other maids who are also equally affected by the inequality of the system that they lived in. And when she says she's safe, she really means it. Like, I'm safe now, and you entirely understand the need to maintain the level of vitriol and the level of sort of unpleasantness that she needs to do in order to like maintain this position. And it is quite wonderful to me. I love that kind of evolution of character where someone that we thought we might have liked, it's become someone that we somewhat loathe by the end of the film. And I think, or we come to understand someone that we may have loathed if we just started at this point.
Yes. I think, now this is where I'll get into a minor problem I had with the film.
Yeah.
And again, I think we've very much covered that we both really enjoyed this movie. But if we're going to be critical of some stuff, there's a moment after Emma Stone's Anne sort of, I'll call it wins for the time being.
Where she says.
Yeah. Where it shows her at a party just shit-faced and being frivolous.
Mm-hmm.
While I do think that that moment was the only moment in the film that threw me out of it ever so slightly, and I got back into it after sort of thinking about the end. Like, basically, when that moment happened, it was such a brash difference of her character in a weird way that I was like, huh? And
what was about it that you didn't?
Because we'd never seen her out of control. She had always had a certain amount of control. And now, of course, it makes sense because, and we'll get to the very, very end, but before getting to the very, very end and seeing that, and you're like, oh, well, she's now thinks she's totally fine, so she can just let loose.
Yeah.
And the way it was a bit of a jarring moment because I'd never seen that character do that. And I was like, it was right before that moment that I realized I was actually rooting for Sarah. But hold on, let me finish my thing. And so then when it instantly switched to Anne being sort of like a drunken Abigail. Oh, I keep calling her Anne. I'm sorry. Yeah. Abigail being a drunken kind of fop.
Yeah.
I was like, I was already impressed with the sleight of hand the movie did, and then it was the movie punching me in the face with it a little bit. Now, granted, I think it works because of the ending.
Right.
But at that particular moment, it was the only time where I was like, "Oh, okay, movie. I guess we could, keep hitting this." And again,
what were they keep hitting?
The fact that like she's safe, she's won, and now she's going to just be like an asshole,
right?
Because before she was at least being the only time.
But isn't that the transformation?
But she was only being an asshole to get power, and now she's just being an asshole because she's an asshole,
right?
And I had already sort of clicked that in my head, and then the movie showed it to me again. It's like the movie did such a good job setting it up that when it showed me it, I was just sort of like, okay. It felt like a small redundancy. Again, this is just what's going through my head when I saw it. Okay. But then, as I know you do want to get to the ending.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that first? Because I've just been rambling for a minute, and then we can sort of go through.
Well, I guess, it's funny because I saw this with my wife, and she was like, I knew when this movie started, this was going to have one of those non-ending movies, non-ending endings. And I was like, oh, what do you mean? I thought the ending was wonderful. And it was interesting because we had completely different sort of interpretations of what happened at the end.
I thought this had an ending.
Yeah, I think that I'm kind of on that side where I kind of firmly believe that this film ended, but it sort of ends on a sort of odd note.
Your wife went full lobster for me.
She did. But like once we talked it through, she kind of she seemed to change her mind about it. But I think the ending for me was just this amazing. It pointed to one thing that this film was really clever at that you never ever felt you never consciously felt during the film, which is that this film uses its visual cues really effectively and never ever like points them out highly, even though it's doing extraordinary things. Like they use this 6mm lens in this film, which is this ultra wide lens, which basically makes the horizon curve. Yeah. And so you get these like incredible wide shots where where, you know, like you get this sort of optical distortion around the sides and it basically feels like a globe. And the other thing that it does is it makes the characters really small within the worlds that they live in.
Right.
So it's an incredible visual cue that this film does. That's also kind of, it's a strange thing because that optical distortion that you get with ultra wide lenses is it's kind of like something you would avoid in most films. You would never really like, but this film like really leans into it.
They leaned real hard into the snow globiness of it in a weird
and
way.
also like moving the camera with that lens is a real like you're drawing attention to the fact that you're watching this world through a lens.
Yeah.
But they lean into it really hard. And what's amazing about it is the ending of the film is purely visual. You know, like the where this film kind of ends up is an entirely visual metaphor, and it's wonderful. So the way I watched it was like, okay, so Queen Anne, so Abigail is basically, as you said, you know, like in full complete control. Now she is the privy to the purse, I think is what it's called. Is you know, she's in charge of the budget. She's sitting there sipping champagne.
She's not in charge of the budget.
That was her role. She was privy to the privy to the purse.
Oh.
And that's why she was able to call out Sarah's embezzlement of money. You know, she was looking at the budget, which is what Sarah used to do at the beginning of the film. That was her role.
Gotcha.
So you know, she's entirely in control, and then she kind of out of playful cruelty steps on this rabbit.
Ooh.
You know, which is like, yeah, it's a real like, oh my God, you know, like how far have we fallen? And I think, I'm not certain if Anne hears that squeal or just kind of chooses this moment to like,
I think she did
put Abigail in her place.
Yeah.
And what's amazing about it is that the visual cue here is that, you know, she says, "Rub my legs," which is, of course, in code nomenclature for this film is, you know, "Bring me to orgasm."
Yeah.
And then she says, you know, like, "I can't stand. I need something to hold on to," and she grabs her head very forcefully, and we hear this kind of like we hear some kind of noise off screen as Abigail kind of comes to a realization that the power that she thought she had isn't actually the power that she thought she had, and that the queen is still the queen, and no matter how, you know, like diseased she becomes, how ill she becomes, how deformed she becomes, she will still hold her place in power. And as that sound kind of grows louder and louder, I wasn't certain what that sound was. I thought, like, for me, I thought it was like, at the beginning, I thought it was someone like tightening a leather belt or something.
No.
And then as like, I kind of like, you know, as the film kind of layers the visuals on top of each other, we realize it's the rabbits pattering around.
Listen.
And we realize that Abigail is kind of is one of these rabbits now. She is a plaything of the queen.
Bunnies aren't just cute like everybody supposes.
It's an extraordinary thing because that visual metaphor of the rabbits has transformed throughout the course of the film. You know, initially there was sort of like a form of therapy for the queen who views them as her child. As like, you know, as
they
a
were a replacement for every one of her 17
children. But then as we get to the end of the film, we realize they're not just the replacement, they're also the playthings of the queen, and they are kind of trapped by the queen as Abigail is now.
Listen, this is true of anything, and I think this is an older person's realization. You're never free. You may have you may feel like you're trapped in a cage of your own socioeconomic status or family ties or whatever it is, and you can get more comfortable, there's no question, but you will always have a bit of a cage, and just the style and size of that cage can change. The bunnies themselves are a great representation of this and sort of the end. And I kind of knew the pitter patter right away because I grew up with rabbits. We had a few pets.
Yeah.
And so that was a sound I was familiar with. But, you know, it literally how the queen pins her the same way that she just pinned the rabbit. And you're like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And Anne realizes in that moment that she's not free. She has...
Abigail.
Man, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Abigail realizes that she's not free. And the style and or gildness of the cage has now changed. And so here's where Abigail sits at the end of this film. Thought she was super in power, then she realizes, well, she's not, because like you said, the queen's still the queen. She can't get rid of the queen because the queen is the only reason she's there. And the more, I'll say, off an axis the queen gets, the harder it's going to be for Abigail. And no matter what level of power she's at, she's always under the queen. So she's just in this weird trapped moment, much like all of the bunnies that randomly can be let out of their cages from time to time.
And it's an extraordinary reflection of things that I said in the script earlier on. So Abigail, when she gets married, realizes that she says something along the lines of, my life is a series of mazes. Every time I think I've gotten free, I walk into a new corner. And that is true of what that ending of the film is. And then the other thing that I think is extraordinary is that, Abigail says to Sarah at one point, well, I guess this is that. I've won. And, you'll be, because this is the point at which Sarah is going to be banished from the kingdom. And Sarah says, you don't realize this, but you and I are playing entirely different games. And although Sarah is banished, she's kind of in a way free of the queen. And interestingly, from a historical point of view, again, coming to that question of historical accuracy and inaccuracies, there's two or three things that we should note here. One is that it is hotly debated whether Sarah and Queen Anne were ever in a sexual relationship.
Right.
There is allusion to it because of a poem that was written, but most historians around the period agree that it is very unlikely that Queen Anne would be in a sexual relationship with Sarah. A, because of her illness, having 17 miscarriages, and also because she was quite a devout Christian who would find same-sex relationships somewhat difficult to swallow.
Oh my God! I mean, no one in religion is hypocritical.
But I love that the film, again, just embraces this idea, basically sex is power in this relationship, and embraces that as a way to shortcut ourselves.
It's a shorthand to power strong.
And it's kind of an ingenious one. Same with rabbits. Rabbits were not likely kept as pets. Queen Anne did not keep rabbits, but the film kind of invents this visual metaphor, which it then uses really beautifully at the end of the film. So I think why this film works is this kind of incredible interplay between the visualization of the film and the screenplay, which is, the screenplay, I don't know if you do this thing now. When I'm watching a movie, I'm trying to pick the line that I'm going to say at the start of the podcast. And it's really annoying because I'm like, oh, that was, I'm trying to remember that line as the movie's going along.
I don't want to stop to write it down. There was a bunch that I liked better than the one I chose. And I was like, I'm going to remember this, remember it. And then the movie's so good that you just don't remember it.
And it's just this annoying thing that we have now. But this film was full of such great zingers.
Quotables.
Yeah, it's just such a quotable movie. So effortlessly made, I think the thing you said at the beginning, it was effortlessly period. The costume design in this, the house that they filmed in. I was reading about the behind the scenes because this is a heritage home that cannot be damaged. But Yorgos wanted to film in natural light, kind of a la Stanley Kubrick and Barry Lyndon. Which meant that the art department had to have wax handlers because they would have candles everywhere, and the candle wax could not hit the floor because it's a heritage home. So they were running around trying to light the movie with natural lighting.
That tacked a couple mil on there, I'm sure.
It's a very cheap movie to make. That's the other thing about this movie. I was like, this is it seems so grand and opulent.
Was it 15 mil?
15 mil. That's a tiny budget.
But their entire budget, honestly, is costumes, location, and safety things. That's really what it is, right?
And it's a talky film. There's a film of,
he had some horse parts,
some gentle horseplay.
Yeah, some just like I was thinking of when Sarah goes off for her rides, and anytime you do that, you add some cost, but nothing
extraordinary. And that's what I love about this film is it's relatively speaking, it's a small movie. But it feels so grand, so opulent, and it's all on the strength of the screenplay. This is a wonderful screenplay by Deborah Davis and Tony McNamara. And read again. Like you should find it. This is the only screenplay Deborah Davis has ever written, and she wrote it in 1998, and it's taken this long for it to come to the screen, which I think is an extraordinary testament. Tony McNamara was brought in when Yorgos Lanthimos came in. This is also the first film that Yorgos Lanthimos has written without his usual writer, Ethemis Philippou. It's really strange to me, and I guess it's telling that a filmmaker as talented but as abstract and kind of weird as Yorgos Lanthimos is now kind of entering into the mainstream world.
I mean, I think it's a really sort of a best of both worlds type thing, because there's definitely underlying strangeness in this film.
It's an odd tale,
and it's not as blatant as, say, The Lobster, of course. But I think that's good, because look, if for the people that want I'll just say The Lobster, right, or things like The Lobster, that's always going to be there, and I'm sure he's going to make things like that again.
I hope so.
But then I think it's great when a director can kind of take some perspective of the entirety of filmmaking and be like, you know what, maybe I'll tell this tale when your this is a weird statement, but when your oddness doesn't have to be your calling card.
Right.
He's taking what makes his oddness special and his style and putting it into something which we've both sort of considered a little more mainstream. But he's not like, well, this is just me. He's not being, so far it seems, and I don't think he's ever done it in his film, he's never being odd just to be odd. This particular story he wanted to tell asked for a certain brand of filmmaking and storytelling, and he did that, and he wanted to do that. So that's great. I like it.
Does that make you reverse what you said about The Lobster ending?
No.
Because I think the thing, I don't want to open that conversation, but the disagreement we had is that you felt that he didn't choose to make an ending.
I still feel he didn't choose to make an ending. I mean,
but watching this now, where he's so in control, do you now think that was the ending he wanted for The Lobster?
I don't think he had a decision. I think he just was
because my point, I think, with The Lobster was you can dislike the ending, but I actually don't even love that ending. But it's very clearly made by someone who wanted that to be the end. Like I can't reconcile that being like, oh, I just stopped making
again
the movie.
Without getting too deep into it, without me having watched it again, because I haven't watched The Lobster in years at this point. I still don't think that I still remember the feeling I got of just sort of like, oh my god, this could go so many different directions. End it.
Right.
Right.
No, and I'm again, I don't want to open The Lobster, but I guess what I'm saying is,
if you want to crack that open,
what I'm saying is that, you know, like seeing that this is a filmmaker in control who knows what they're doing, who clearly has a command of storytelling and visual acuity and understands how the things they do will affect people.
I see what you're saying.
Do you think that changes your opinion?
No, because this film did that for me, and his last one didn't.
Okay.
That's just how, that's not to say that I don't think he ever had it in him even during The Lobster. It was just that particular time gave me that feeling.
Okay.
Anyway, I mean, go see The Favorite. Shahir, is that about?
How favorite is it of yours of the films we've seen so far this year? As we're wrapping up. As we're thinking about, I know we haven't come to those lists.
That's going to be interesting. It could be on the lower end. I really enjoyed this. It was something that I knew I had a feeling I'd like, but not that I'd love, and I really did love it. I think I'm hoping that more and more people go to see it. I was actually happy to see, because when did it get released?
November this year.
Yeah, so it was still playing a decent amount of showtimes in a lot of different theaters, and I like that. Like that, this seems like a movie that would be like great, but kind of like that flash in the pan and just sort of out of theaters when they need like 9 screens for Aquaman or whatever.
A lot of Oscar buzz around this movie.
That's good.
So
that's good.
I think this is a film that will play into the Oscar crowd quite well.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed this film. I think everyone should absolutely go see it. But I think this is not necessarily the mainstreaming of Yorgos Lanthimos' career. Like, I don't think he's purposely trying to make a mainstream film. I just think he's found a story that happens to appeal to more people than his other films will.
But if he wants to direct Squirrel Girl, I mean, he could do it.
I don't think you want him to direct Squirrel Girl. I don't think you want him to direct a Marvel movie.
Why not?
Because I don't think he will make the kind of Marvel movie you want.
Fuck it. I'm all about the different. I love it when they do different things with it. That's the goal.
Right.
Because you're going to run out. I mean, look, you can only do so many things. And again, let's not get into the Marvel thing.
Yeah.
Let's just move on. This has been the only podcast about the film The Favorite with a U.
Which is the Queen's English.
The Queen's English. Shahir, when you are not peeking around the gilded curtain into the aristocracy's own private boudoir. Where can folks find you?
You can find me at my website, www.shahirdowd.com. That's spelled D. I was trying to make a U joke and I got distracted.
I liked it.
It's spelled S-H-A. I can't spell my own name. What the fuck is going on?
No, but you did. You were spelling. That was correct.
I know, but I get my brain was trying to jump ahead to the joke, and I was like, I got lost.
It happens to the best of us.
I lost on the simplest thing. Shahir Dowd, SHAHIRDAUD. That's what I was trying to get to. .com. Matt, when you are not speaking in the heathen tongue of the American English, where the favorite is spelt without a U, without a U, where can people find you?
Where can people find you?
Yeah.
In the words you just said, but also at my website, mattewkrol.com for my life and works. Also Skeletor, the number 4, PREZ on Instagram, or Emperor MSK on Twitter. Also, come check out Extra Credits. We are on break right now, but we got plenty of really cool stuff. Actually, our second episode of the Sun Yat-sen series, speaking of extra history, was trending across the holidays between, I think, number 4 and number 8 on YouTube for a while. I don't know why. I mean, I actually have an idea why. I think it's an excellent series written by Robert Rath. But also, Sun Yat-sen is a incredibly prominent Chinese political figure. Right. And I don't know if that audience is represented a lot in sort of American-made historical content. So if you're interested in that period of time, please go check out the first 2 episodes of that, and we return, I believe, not this coming week. This podcast is being released, but the following with the other 3 episodes. His story is fascinating. I'm actually going to look up films. And actually, I'm going to talk to Rob and see if there's any sort of really well done Sun Yat-sen stories, like narrative stories, because it's fascinating. Yeah. It's insane how he changed the face of China and how you want to talk about power plays or flip-flops or like where you are in your current which cage you're in. This man it's insane. So anyway,
we're coming up to the end of the year now, so please start giving us your top 10 list if you are thinking about that. We will have a top 10 coming up. Probably, definitely in the new year at this stage, because this episode is being released prior to the end of 2019.
Something also I'd like to try too, if the listeners are interested, is if you want to sort of this plays into the term of favorite. If you want to send us maybe a 30-second reason of why your favorite film is your favorite film, if we get enough of them, maybe we could integrate that into the episodes, depending on how we. This is an idea I literally just came up with now. I'm sorry, I'm just throwing it on the table, but I love hearing from all you. Obviously, we both do email style too, but if you're comfortable with the microphone and you can record 30 seconds of audio that doesn't sound bad, then I'd love to throw your opinions on what your favorite films of 2018 were.
Your iPhone or Android phone will be sufficient.
Oh, 100%. Do not worry about it. Just don't do it on the highway. Or if you are doing it on the highway, don't do it while driving, but call out where you are and why the noises sound like you are on a highway.
You can send those to onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter @onlymoviepod. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year. Oh, because this comes out on New Year's Eve.
That's right.
Wow.
That's
what I was
talking about.
Oh, wow. I guess I got so lost in all the U's.
Yeah. There's no I in you.
These 2 U's.
There's no I in IOU, but
IOU. I just made a cousin Vinny. Well, you'll hear us next week.
Bye.